We want to take an international perspective tonight on one of the biggest stories of the week here in this country, financing political campaigns, and the Supreme Court's 5-4 ruling that corporations and unions can spend unlimited money on campaign advertising. As the New York Times points out, the decision is expected to unleash a torrent of attack advertisements from outside groups aiming to sway voters without any candidate having to take the criticism for dirty campaigning. With that in mind, we wanted to take a look tonight at how some other major democracies finance campaigns in their countries. For that, we are joined tonight from Washington by Kevin Casas-Zamora, Senior Fellow in Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution and a former Vice President of Costa Rica. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
So, in contrast to the United States, election campaigns in some leading democratic countries are primarily state-funded. Tell us what some of those countries may be, but most importantly, how the elections work there.
Different countries deal with what, in essence, is a very intractable issues in different ways. In the case of most of Western Europe, state funding systems play a crucial role in regulating the role of money in politics. In some countries, such as Canada and the UK, the role of spending limits is central. In the case of the U.S., it is very clear that the central element of the whole system of regulation is about transparency. It's about the need to report every income source that parties and candidates use during their campaigns. So there's no silver bullet. In countries in Western Europe, state funding systems tend to be very generous, and that has a lot to do with the nature of their political system and the fact that they need to shore up political parties, and parties have a permanent presence in a way that is not the case in the U.S.
And in the U.S., spending on political campaigns is viewed as an exercise of free speech. Do other countries see it that way?
No, that's a very unique trait of the debate on campaign finance reform in the U.S. In most other countries, while there is obviously an interest in guaranteeing the exercise of freedom of speech during campaigns, there's also the perception that it is important for democracy to level the playing field so that every political actor gets, or at least most political actors get, a fair hearing before the voters. I mean, that's a concern that is not so prominent in the U.S.
And regulating political finance can sometimes backfire. Tell us about India's attempt to ban corporate contributions and why it didn't work.
Well, India tried to ban corporate contributions outright and did so for nearly 2 decades. It backfired for a very simple reason. I mean, corporate contributions kept flowing into the political system, but through particularly opaque and questionable means below the table. And I think there's a lesson here, and the lesson is that the more difficult it becomes for political actors to raise funds legally for campaigning, the more likely it is that they will raise the funds through illegal and questionable means. So a little bit of moderation in regulating political finance is very important.
You mentioned the transparency being significant in the U.S. system. How does that stack up, say, against other European countries, other parts of the world?
Actually, very well. I mean, most Western European countries and most developed democracies have very lax transparency rules. I mean, we're talking here about very respectable democracies such as Sweden, Norway, Switzerland. They hardly have any rules to force parties and candidates to report their income sources. So the U.S. Does very well in that regard.
Kevin Casas-Zamora, thank you very much.
My pleasure.